Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I would like to welcome you to our regular Kaffeepause. During our Kaffeepause events, we check in with a journalist based in Germany to talk about the news stories behind the headlines, and I am delighted to welcome back Miriam Hollstein. She is chief reporter for Stern in Berlin and a frequent guest, but I have to admit, we haven't had the opportunity to have you for the Kaffeepause in almost a year. So I am especially happy to have you back again. Miriam, why don't you start by just sort of setting the stage for us and sharing with us what the issues are that you're following and that are top of mind in the German media?
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. The biggest issue for me and right now in Germany, in German politics, is the Taurus, so-called Taurus League, because these were the most troubling news of the weekend for us. You might have followed this, that the Russia Today, which is the state-controlled Russian TV news channel, published on Friday a recorded conversation of high-ranking German military officers, which was intercepted by the Russian Secret Service on February 19th. It's a 38 minutes long audio, and if you understand German, you can listen to it because it's all over the place in the social networks. And you can hear the four officials discussing different scenarios, how Ukraine could use Taurus cruise missiles if Germany would deliver them. For example, how they could carry out an attack on the Crimean Bridge using the Taurus. One of the participants is Ingo Gerhards, and he is not only the head of the German Air Force, but he is the man who is supposed to take over the Allied Joint Forces Command of NATO next year. So he's really high-ranking. It seems that most of the information they talk about in this conversation is already known, was already public, but obviously it's a confidential conversation. And I spoke with someone from the Ministry of Defense, and he said it has been classified as kind of a normal conversation for official use. And then you're allowed to use WebEx, but obviously the information they talk about, it should not have been this classification. Mm-hmm. There's another classification like secret, and the next one is NATO secret. And if you have such kind of conversations, you use a room where you cannot be, how do you call this? Abhörsicherheit-proofed, right?
Yeah, I mean, that are basically secure lines. One of the accusations is that this group did not use a secure line when they could have for this conversation.
They should have used what we call a red phone for it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this caused a lot of stir in Germany, and the opposition has called for a special investigation. The Minister of Defense had to do a press statement on Sunday on a very short notice. And of course, politicians from the far right and the far left tried to use it for their own purpose by declaring it would show that the German government is preparing a war of aggression against Russian targets in Ukraine, which is not true, but this is the Russian narrative. So it shows that Russian propaganda works very well in Germany and that we are not really prepared to fight it. And the big question now is, what else do the Russians know about our confidential exchanges? And the other big question is, why did they publish it now? Because by making it public, they know that now it's over with WebEx conversations. So there are two possible answers. They already know what they need to know, or there might be no need to use WebEx or to rely on WebEx conversation, which means that this is a theory, but there might be a spy in the German army, or one spy or several spies working for the Russian government. This is just
so in the reporting that I had seen so far, I hadn't seen anything that mentioned the possibility of a spy. But obviously I had seen lots of questions about, what's worse, the fact that this secret conversation has come to light and that it's being used in Russia's information war, right? That was the term that Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, used, that this was an information war. Or does it show that the German military is somewhat naive in thinking that these sorts of things are not happening, that Russia is not trying to collect information on what they're doing? That's sort of one of the themes that I saw playing out in the media. And of course, this comes at a time when Scholz, the chancellor, has been extremely clear about Germany not providing the Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine because they would need German soldiers to help program them, right? I mean, that's one of the essential elements in this. So it seems like there are two levels to this, right? One is the information crisis vis-a-vis Russia and Moscow, and the other is what this has done to the Taurus debate within Germany.
And it comes at the end of a week which has been particularly difficult for Germany because, as you mentioned, in the beginning of the week, Olaf Scholz declared that Germany would not deliver Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. And on Monday, there was this meeting with Macron and 20 European leaders in France, where Macron suggested that there could be the possibility of sending ground troops to Ukraine by NATO or by one or another European country. And Scholz was very upset because of this statement. I heard from people close to him that Macron had informed him before that he would suggest this, and that Scholz told him, don't do it. We are not in favor of this. So when Macron did it, Scholz distanced himself very clearly, as did other allies. But I think that the dilemma is that the French-German couple should lead Europe, especially now in times where we are afraid that there could be a second term of Trump, and instead they are fighting each other.
So I guess one of the things, and I'd like to pick up on that thread, what does that say about the state of the Franco-German relationship? I mean, for months now, we've heard that this relationship is troubled. And as I've shared with some people, it was surprising to me that France was not represented at the Munich Security Conference. They were sort of conspicuous through their absence. Of course, just before the Munich Security Conference, Zelensky had been in Paris and there had been a bilateral agreement between France and Ukraine. But it seems to me that this is a time when it would be helpful for Europe to show stronger solidarity and a stronger alliance. And we're just not seeing that between Paris and Berlin.
Yeah, as you said, I think it's just the relations are in a very bad state right now. And one of the reasons is that they are very different, Macron and Scholz. Scholz is very pragmatic and almost shy in public, and Macron, he's very charismatic, he's very outgoing, so it doesn't fit very well. But obviously they also have different opinions in a strategic evaluation of the situation. Macron is in favor of, and I think he's right, he's in favor of this concept of strategic ambiguity.
Ambiguity, yeah.
And Scholz isn't. But I mean, now we can't put any psychological pressure. The German side cannot put any psychological pressure on Putin anymore. He absolutely knows what to expect from Germany. Okay, the Germans are not going to send Taurus cruise missiles. Scholz repeated today, I said no, so there will be no Taurus in Ukraine.
And I mean, as a reporter who's been following this, do you think that that is likely to change in the near term, that position?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think so, because I mean, in the past, what we saw is that Olaf Scholz said, no, we are not going to send this system or another system. And then the pressure increased, but and he ended up by sending it. So after a while, after being a little reluctant. So I think the impression for a lot of Germans was that our chancellor is thinking a lot before making up his mind and taking responsibility for this decision. But this time he was so clear in saying no to Taurus. I think he's not going to end up by sending it. And it's interesting because he knows that the majority of the Germans he has the majority of the Germans on his side. We had a poll showing that 56% of the Germans are against sending Taurus to Ukraine, and only, I think, 35% are in favor. And we think that Olaf Scholz, this will be the way how he wants to win the chancellery again in 2025, by presenting himself as the Prince of Peace, so to say.
Well, I want to pick up on that theme in just a second and ask you about something that you covered recently. But before we do that, I have one more question from one of our viewers, one of our listeners, about the leak and about this current scandal. The viewer asks, some have suggested that the so-called leak was fake news itself, i.e. disinformation, and asks that you comment on that. My understanding is that there's no question about the veracity of the conversation, right? This was an audio recording of German military officers, and nobody has denied that this is something that actually happened or that it's fake news or an audio fake. Have you heard anything indicating that this might be disinformation?
No, on the contrary, it has been confirmed by a spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense that this conversation happened on February 19th. And if you listen to it, you can identify the voices. Well, it could be fake too, but it's no doubt that this is a real conversation.
And in a report that I read this morning from Politico, a high-level Bundeswehr officer who only commented on the condition of anonymity said, quote, "Heads must roll now. Conducting such a highly confidential conversation over an unsecured line is grossly negligent." You had mentioned that that this is being assessed, right? The situation is being assessed and scrutinized to see what led up to this decision. But do you think that there will be real consequences for these officers using WebEx instead of using a secure communication line?
I think that the Minister of Defense, Pistorius, is in a real dilemma, because on one hand, he has to do something because a lot of soldiers are looking at this incident and they say, if this had happened to us, we would have been fired right away. So he has to do something. On the other hand, if he would fire the boss of the Air Force, the head of the Air Force, I mean, this would be another victory for the Russians, right? So I think he's not going to fire Gerhard. I don't know what he's going to do, but it could be one of the four who participated in this conversation who could not fired, but maybe downgraded, or like there will be consequences, I think.
So I wanted to come back to what you were saying just now about what might be going through Scholz's mind as he thinks about the fall of 2025 and his re-election campaign. You actually reported on I guess a town hall that Olaf Scholz participated in Saxony, where he used the expression Diplomaten statt Granaten, diplomats instead of grenades, and that this was basically his approach to how to deal with the situation in Ukraine, that he sees diplomacy playing a bigger role than the military side of things. Can you talk a little bit about that town hall in Saxony and the sort of impact of this phrase that Scholz has used before as well, but in this context?
Yes, this was interesting. I was with him that day. He spent the entire day in Saxony, and it's really a good example that you never should trust what you see in the social networks, because at this town hall meeting, he spoke for quite a while about the German stance on Ukraine, and it was what he always does. There were no surprises, and then towards the end of the meeting, one participant, he said he gave him a paper where the slogan was printed, Diplomaten statt Granaten, and he said, please take this to your foreign minister, because this message is important. And what Scholz wanted to do is he wanted to be on eye level with the citizen, although he could feel that he probably is from the extreme right, because this is a slogan of the extreme right, but Scholz didn't know that this is a slogan of the AfD uses quite often. So, but he wanted to be on eye level with the citizen, and he said, well, we could take this slogan, but we should take it to Moscow, and we should tell Putin, diplomats instead of Granaten, if you're ready to negotiate with us, we don't need to support the Ukraine. We don't need to send weapons to Ukraine anymore. So, but people on the social network took just this sentence and said, oh, this shows that he does not want to support Ukraine in a military way anymore. And that was just not true. But by listening only to this sentence, you could get the impression.
And I mean, as you say, of course, there was much more in that session, and you were there for it. But how was the rest of the Chancellor's visit to Saxony, especially with a view to the state elections that are coming up in October?
Well,
and just sort of the political mood in Saxony and elsewhere in the East.
I was surprised that the protest was not so intense when you had a lot of security. Security has become crazy when you have a high-ranking politician visiting the country. So a lot of police officers and controls. But in front of the building where the town hall meeting take place, a party of the extreme right had called for the people to come and to protest against the chancellor. And they were like 80 people, so not a lot of people. And it was pretty calm. So I think that the mood is bad, especially in East Germany. And there are high chances that the AfD will come in first at all 3 regional elections in fall. But in the center of these aggressions and attacks are mainly the politicians from the Green Party.
So I have to ask, I mean, the polling numbers for the AfD seem to be coming down a little bit. They're still high. but after the reporting in Correctif about this secret meeting that members of the AFD had with members of the far right, where they talked about migration policy, this has sparked protests and demonstrations across the country in major cities, but also in small towns against the AFD and against the far right. Do you think that the polling numbers that we're seeing now accurately reflect how people will vote in the European elections in June, but also in next year's or in this fall's elections in the East? Or do you think we're seeing a little bit more of a protest against the federal government in these polling numbers?
I would hope that it would represent a change in mood, but I'm not too optimistic about this. The AFD might lose some percentage points, hopefully, but I still think they will perform very strongly at the state elections. And the last weekend, there was, just to give you a small example, there was the case of a small town in Saxony where the former mayor or the mayor had committed suicide, probably for different reasons, but he had a rival from the AFD at the last elections, and this rival from this AFD politician, he used not very nice methods to discriminate the mayor, the long-term mayor of this small town. So he ended up for different reasons, probably by committing suicide. And now they had new elections, and this AFD politician has been elected for mayor. So I think a lot of people in East Germany, they feel so neglected.
Yeah, neglected. Yeah.
Neglected. They are so fed up with traffic light coalition. They are so fed up with the Greens that they are going to vote for the AFD. But probably the AFD will not be able to form a government, and that probably is the most important outcome of these elections.
Well, but that leads to another question or concern, if you will, that first and foremost, how does one deal with a anti-democratic party that's democratically elected, right? I mean, that I think for our societies provides a huge challenge. But the other is, and this is, I guess, one of my concerns of what might happen in the East at the state level, is if, in light of how difficult it is for the three-party coalition at the federal level to work, to function, if at the state level you need 3 or maybe 4 parties to create a coalition with the sole purpose of keeping the AFD out of government, I wonder if they have enough of a common denominator to actually make policy and do what they need to do. And I think that could also put wind in the sails of the AFD to say, you see, everybody else is supporting us and not enabling us to be in government, which is where we belong, given our showing in the polls.
Yes, I think it will be a very difficult situation after the elections in fall. But I mean, a lot of people still hope that the prime ministers in the regions, that maybe not in Thuringia from the left, because he already is in a minority coalition, but the prime minister of Saxony and the prime minister of Brandenburg, that they will find ways to stay in power in coalition with, we don't know with whom, with several partners, but that they will be able to show that they can still form a more or less stable government. And we still don't know how the new party of Sarah Wagenknecht will perform. if it will be so strong that it could become one of the partners of such a coalition. But it will be a difficult situation. But at the same time, the protests against the AfD we saw during the last few weeks, there were a strong symbol of not normalizing the AfD any longer. And I think this could help the other parties to be a little stronger.
So while we're talking about domestic politics, I'd like to shift gears a little bit because there have been over the past few months a number of strikes of the rail network, of public transportation, of the airlines, and just at the end of last week there was a bus and train strike, and over the weekend and today there was new news that these strikes will continue and that there will be strikes at airports from, I guess, Thursday morning through Saturday morning this week. I know that these strikes have affected a lot of people and also created even renewed frustration with the government, but also with the fact that these strikes are taking place. Can you talk a little bit about the strikes and sort of the impact that those are having on the political mood?
In the past, there was a lot of comprehension for the strikes because, I mean, it's for better salaries. So a lot of people showed a lot of solidarity, although it was really difficult traveling through Germany during these strikes. But I think now people are really starting to get fed up with it. We just heard today that there will be a new strike starting on Wednesday night. And also the head of the syndication of the, how do you call this, Bahngewerkschaft, Weselski?
Yeah, the train driver union, right? I mean, it was the Lokführer, right? The train driver union.
He's announced that in the future he would not announce strikes anymore some days before. He would just do it to increase pressure. And I think this will lead to the result that people are not in favor of these strikes anymore. And plus, people are in general, they are very exhausted. This is still a result of the pandemic, time of pandemic, that people are very exhausted, and our train system is rotten. They are never in time, the trains. So people are really tired of the situation. But of course, this is also something which plays against the traffic light coalition. I have the feeling here that nothing works. I always think, okay, yeah, it's a difficult situation, but come and travel to another country, maybe outside of Europe, not the United States. And then you see that in other countries, the situation is much more complicated than it is in Germany.
I mean, I think you're right. There are lots of complicated situations, and certainly we have our problems with our infrastructure and rail lines and trains not necessarily being on time. But I think that in a country of Mitbestimmung, of co-determination, where labor, business, and government are supposed to come together and come up with compromises, there is a growing frustration in Germany that these strikes are continuing and that there doesn't seem to be a solution in sight. And it seems as if, as you indicated, the governing coalition is at least partly responsible for that, or at least in the eye of the citizens, in the eye of the voters, that there is a sense of frustration with the government that these problems are not being resolved.
And plus, the chancellor is just not admitting mistakes, his own mistake. He is always telling people that everything is fine, that there has been a lot of success, a lot of successful projects done by the government, and that's not what people feel. So that's also part of the growing frustration.
So Germany was also in the international headlines last week, and there was a story that you also covered in Stern, because Daniela Kletta, a member of the leftist military group, the Red Army faction, was finally arrested after basically living in plain sight for almost 30 years, or about 30 years. She was a fugitive who was wanted for decades, and she was living in Berlin, and she was finally arrested. You covered this story. I haven't really had the opportunity yet to talk to anybody how this story has resonated in Germany and how people are sort of following it. I've seen obviously some of the press reports about it. But can you talk a little bit about this arrest and sort of what it means, why it's important, and why it's important right now?
I think the story or the incident or the arrest intrigues a lot of people because the Red Army faction and what it did is such a big chapter in our history.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were these
horrible... There were assassinations, there were bombings.
But not only like terror attacks, but like the assassination of really high-ranking state figures in Germany. So that was, and the state reacted in a very aggressive way, kind of almost helpless way. So it was a really tense time back then. So a lot of people still talk about it, and it's like it has traumatized our society, and we still can feel it today. This is one part why we talk a lot about it. And then you have a kind of a radical young leftist group who still sees these ex-terrorists as their heroes. You also have this in Germany. It's like Che Guevara, but the German version to them. But it also intrigued a lot of people because she was living just next door. I mean, just a few kilometers away from my place, and she could do it without being arrested for years. And there was this other story that two journalists a few months ago, they got a hint where she could be, and they asked someone to use artificial intelligence to detect her picture, and they found out that they found pictures of a woman participating in a dance class in Germany. But in the end, they were not able to find her, but that was her. Because when she was arrested by the police, we found out that for years she had been a participant in a dance class in Berlin, and that she posted pictures of her were posted in the internet. So now people are wondering if two journalists can do this within a few minutes with artificial intelligence, why is the police not able to do so? And this again it makes us feel that that our state is not working very well. It's not functioning very well right now.
But it also leads to other questions about data and private protections, right? I mean, in one of the pieces that I read about this, it indicated that it probably would have been relatively easy for the German police, for the German authorities to find her using pretty easily available facial recognition tools, and that they have not done that they have not been able to do that, but that it took two journalists who don't even speak German, I think, very little time of applying some of these tools to find her. And that ultimately led to her arrest. And so I think that this opens up a whole other question of sort of how do you make people feel safe, but then how do you also use modern technology to try to find some of the other individuals who are still being searched for, right? There was a call for, I guess, one more of Daniela Kletta's colleagues to come forward. And there was I guess, a search over the weekend of another site for some of these other RAF actors who are all, in their late 50s to mid 60s at this point.
Yeah, they haven't found them yet, but they searched several places in Berlin.
Yeah.
I think they don't represent a danger anymore, but of course it would be important to get more information about what they did when they were still active as terrorists. Yeah, but I totally agree. I mean, it shows you that digitalization is really not very well known by the German police. And I recently spoke to now I don't know the word, digital forensica.
Yeah, so I guess a digital forensic expert.
A digital forensic expert who is now covering or helping in a lot of trials. And for example, in the trial with the Jewish singer Gil Ofarim, who said that he was insulted because he was wearing the Cross of David in a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know this story?
No, I don't.
I know. Okay. So anyway, he proved, this expert proved that he did not wear the chain with the Star of David. And I did an interview with him to make a long story short. And he said, when I started, the police told me, a high-ranking police officer told me, oh, this will never work out, the digital forensic expertise. We don't need this, by the way. So, but now people, I think they start to understand that it's really very important to work with this tool.
Mm-hmm. So as we come to a close, I'd like to fold in another question from one of our listeners who writes, and it basically sort of brings full circle our conversation, because we started by talking about the Taurus and the Russian release of a conversation by senior officers from the Bundeswehr, and this listener is curious and writes the following: the German military is criticized by some as being underfunded. It is underpopulated or understaffed. Some even consider it to be pacifist or even inept. Now top leaders are reinforcing the stereotype. A general ignores basic security, and a chancellor is considered a prince of peace. Is redemption possible? Can Germans feel safe? And I think one has to add to that, there's been a lot of discussion about the Bundeswehr in recent years, and some factions within the Bundeswehr of extremists, where there's been some concern about that. But there's also been real concern that the Bundeswehr is not functional, and that there has been very little investment in the Bundeswehr. So the question really is, how does the Bundeswehr recover? But to your point, Miriam, given how many challenges exist at the moment, how does Germany come back from this and instill a sense of confidence in its people?
Well, I'm not sure if this is true that we don't feel safe, because you should not underestimate how many people in Germany are still fond of the idea of that we are a nation of peace, and that we should not aggress other countries, and that we should not have like a big army, which shows the support for not sending Taurus cruise missiles. And plus, I mean, if Putin would attack another country, I think a lot of Germans think it would not be Germany in the first place, but one of the Baltic states or Moldavia. But it's true that we have to change our minds, and that we have to learn a new perception of security and defense. But given the fact that for such a long time we had another self-perception, I mean, we after the Second World War, it was never become a perpetrator again, Germany, and that's so strong in our minds that it will. And then for a long time after the Cold War, we focused on out of area missions. So it will take us a long time to understand that we have to be able to defend our country again. So this is not done in just 1 or 2 years or 5 years. I think it'll take a generation.
But it seems to be moving in that direction. I mean, I think with Russia's attack on Ukraine 2 years ago, with Olaf Scholz's Zeitenwende speech, with the commitment to invest 100 billion in the Bundeswehr, Germany certainly seems to be moving in the right direction. But I think you're right. This is the kind of thing that takes time to develop.
It's moving in this direction, but I would say with baby steps.
Yeah.
For the last example, we had the discussion about should Germany have its own atomic bomb. And you will find a lot of people here in Germany say no, we should never have we should nuclear weapons in Germany. So it all takes time for us.
But this also seems to be a new debate that's coming to the surface again in some circles, at least. The degree to which Germany, but also the degree to which Europe should think about its nuclear posture, and whether or not Germany should actually have nuclear weapons itself. So it continues. I mean, it is part of the debate. So I think that's probably a good thing, because at least people are talking about it and not ignoring these issues.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Well, Miriam, herzlichen Dank. As ever, it is always great to talk to you, and I know that we covered a broad swath of topics today, but it is always a pleasure to get your insights on what's going on in Germany and sort of to measure the pulse of what's happening. So ein herzlichen Dank nach Berlin. Many, many thanks to you for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure, and hopefully see you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.